Hi, this is Amelia Vogler, specialist in energy medicine and your host in the Energy Magazine exclusive interview series. Today, our guest is Suzy Miller. Suzy was a former speech pathologist turned integration specialist who works using processes of presence and reflection to help individuals find their way back to wholeness. Suzy is the author of the July-August Energy Magazine article, Children as Energy Medicine. And Suzy, it's so wonderful to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm. So Suzy, as you know, each one of us is trying to come home to the fullness of who we are. And you talk about in your article that children are one of the greatest healers for their parents because they allow deep reflection and transformation and healing in that they reflect the parents' strategies for kind of keeping themselves away from the deep truth of who they are, sort of the masks that they wear or we wear, if you will. So I'd love to share a little bit more, ask you to share a little bit about how you came to understand this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, actually, I came to understand it directly from the kids themselves. It's so many of the children that I worked with from the very beginning were they were showing me or telling me directly that the things that they were having challenges and problems with were the same things that their parents were having challenges and problems with. So a lot of times, like for instance, I might be working with a child diagnosed with autism or some other energetic sensitivity, and more often than not the parent comes thinking that the child is having a problem, right? The child is having an issue. But when I would connect with the child energetically, telepathically, and get that information back, a lot of times they would start explaining what the reflection actually was. So they would say, this behavior is reflecting this particular challenge. And as I would start to talk to the parent about the particular challenge that the child was having, all of a sudden they would see it in themselves. It was like it went hand in hand. And I can also say that, once having had this experience with so many kids, I became much more aware of my own patterns and also aware of how my own children, I have 4 daughters, and so I had plenty of experience having my stuff reflected back to me as well, and you start putting 2 and 2 together. Honestly, it's, oh, this experience, this behavior that's going on in front of me that I'm irritated or frustrated with or challenged by, it has a lot less to do with the individual that's expressing that behavior and much more to do with something that's yet to be integrated within us, right? And so it got really exciting to think that maybe we could start actually using that opportunity to come into our wholeness instead of pushing against it all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, it takes a brave person to look at themselves in that way too. It does take, we see our lessons every day, and then, it's the one day that we see it that we can go deeper and ask for our permission for ourselves to look at ourselves that way.
I think that's true. And I think that once people really understand that that particular experience will just arise over and over again until we really kind of get the message, then it's like, okay, let me just, at least in my own experience, it was like, okay, just let me get the message.
Right.
Let me go through some of the techniques that the kids have offered me and offered their parents. Let me just do that first. And usually we break the cycle pretty quickly, so we don't have to go through trying to figure it out over and over again.
Oh my gosh, I think we should put a marquee on that. That's for everybody listening. Look for your cycles. There's a way.
There's a way out. Yeah.
I remember, Suzy, reading about the story of Riley, one of your early clients. And and he awakened something really special in you. I'd love it if you shared that story with us.
Yeah, yeah. So in 1999, I was a pediatric speech language pathologist. I had a private practice in the state of Maine. And Riley, this little 4-year-old boy, was somebody that just knew on my caseload. And I was meant to be seeing him in his daycare center. So I went to the daycare center, and when I got there, he was literally marching back and forth in the kitchen, saying, "It's the millennium, it's 1999, it's the millennium, it's 1999." And so, I still had, mind you, I still had my speech pathology eyes on and hat on. And so I thought, okay, this is an interesting little kid. Let's see what's going to happen here, right? And so I walked up to him, and when I walked up to him, he made direct eye contact with me, which now I know is really rare. But at the time, I didn't, I hadn't worked with that many kids diagnosed with autism. So he looked me right in the eye, and he just said, "Master." And when he said "master," I had like this visceral kind of cascade of energy just move through my body. And I wasn't sure what that meant, but I knew something had happened. I had no idea what just happened, but I knew something had. And I remember thinking too, it's like, who's the master here? It's like if somebody could just look at you in the eyes like that and make that kind of response in your body. So I took him back to the back of the daycare center to work with him. And because I was new to working with kids with autism, and because he was not too excited to be in the space away from all of his friends, in the front of the daycare center, I shut the door and I slid my back down the side of the door, and I just sat on the floor, and I thought I would let him get acclimated to the space and to me before we started. And so he's still walking in the room. It's the millennium, it's 1999, perseverating on that statement. And then all of a sudden, I saw his light body up above his physical body. And at the time, I had no idea about light bodies and all this kind of stuff. So, and it was like a perfect cutout, like it was a light body version of his little body, his little 4-year-old body floating right above him. And off the tail of his foot, there was a tail that came down into the crown of his head and just touched right into the center of his heart. But that was the only connection between the light body and the physical body. And so I'm rubbing my eyes and wondering what it is I'm actually seeing. And so you ask the natural question, which is, what the heck am I seeing? What the heck is that? And as I said that, I didn't say it out loud. I just said it to myself. And when I said that, I heard in this little boy's voice, I heard, "That's my light body. You're here to put my light body back into my physical body." And I had no idea what that meant, except for the fact that there was just something going on. The best way I can say it, there was some visceral shifting and changing, even in that moment. And he basically took me through a year-long process where my own multidimensional skill sets, my telepathy, things like light languages, things like learning from different aspects of myself. He took me through about a year-long process where all of this information just opened up and started flooding back in. And at the end of that year, he asked me to do a session from a distance on his behalf, which I did. And the next day I went to see him physically, and he was talking. So I was pretty much down on my knees in tears. And this kid knew exactly what he needed. The broader part of his consciousness knew exactly why he had called me and what I was there for. And thousands of kids have made the same call since then. So I've learned a lot from each one of them. It's, yeah, amazing.
That's amazing. It just makes me reflect on how the potential of every interaction is so precious and so sacred. And
Yeah, you never know when life is going to, reroute your trajectory. I thought I was on the good speech pathology path. I never thought I'd be doing an interview about multidimensional communication and integration. So,
amazing. Yeah. You mentioned that, everybody that you meet, the children that you work with, the parents that you work with, um, teach you different things. And, one of the things you mentioned learning was the difference between healing and integration.
yep, yep. Yeah. So, this is really from pretty soon after, I would say within maybe 4 or 5 years of meeting Riley, there was this shift that happened around healing. I won't say versus integration, it's healing and integration, because I think healing happens through integration. But the kids kept asking me to refocus it because, in their mind anyway, healing was, there was a suggestion that something was broken, that something needed to be mended or needed to be healed.
Mhm.
And they kept asking me to look more from the perspective that everyone is already whole. Like Riley already had his whole full capacity to, let's say, communicate or to, but it just was covered up by all kinds of other energies and information. So they just kept suggesting to me that if I were to focus on integration, and so integration to me is the peeling away of that which no longer serves the individual, right? And allowing them to then integrate or be present to, be one with what they actually are, right? So the integration is not something so much that is done by me, right? It's something that simply happens because the aspects that are impeding that full presence, that full integration into the physical, just simply start moving away. Yeah. So, yeah, they perceived it as the difference between I'm not broken, so I don't need to be fixed, and I have all of this potential and possibility that can't fully yet be realized because there are other things that are in the way, but the fullness was already there. And when I started the autism practitioner process that I ran for a while, they said the same thing then too. Every adult, every person that comes to you, you see them in their fullness, in their perfected wholeness, and then work from there. So,
Yeah. I suppose, we all are on that path of remembering that fullness and that path of, rekindling a consistent connection to the perfection that we are so that we can speak from it, so that we can live from it, so we can act from it, so that we
yeah.
can share with each other. So I know that you've been in practice for quite some time, and individuals just love hearing stories, So I was wondering if you might share a few stories of what some of this beautiful integration might look like.
Yeah. Well, so I'll share one from a while ago and then one that's more recent. From a while ago, I had a client who was, her autistic son was perseverating quite a bit, and he was perseverating on the things that he needed to do, the list that he had, and it was a perseveration that was, um, it was really significant. I mean, he barely caught a breath in between this perseveration. My list, I need my list, where's my list, that kind of thing. So he was really stuck in that dynamic. And so I was talking with mom about, just about her life, about her experience. And she was sharing that she's a very type A person and she has to get things done and da 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 da. So we started talking about her lists, right? We started talking about, um, how her days are organized and that kind of thing. And as she started reflecting, she kind of got to this place where she's like, oh, she's getting the idea, right, about where this list is coming from. And so she said that, she woke up one morning and she just got it. She just got it that, oh my gosh, it's not his list, it's my list. He's just reflecting my list. And so literally sits up in bed, she gets that. He walks in the room and he has a piece of paper in his hand, puts it down on the bed, and he goes, all done with the list. And he walked away. So, I mean, it's literal. It's like these things can be very literal when we understand that once this integration takes place, the only reason things are coming up in the outer landscape is so that we can integrate them, so that the parent can integrate it or the professional. And once they get the message of what's being played out, they don't have to, that program doesn't have to run anymore, right?
Yeah.
So any number of lots and lots of experiences like that. Another integration opportunity that was really pretty amazing, kind of along the lines of Riley, is I did have another young boy who was only like 3, who he used to come to me through bilocation. He would come to me and literally, little 3-year-old person, sit on the end of my bed and tell me what he needed, right? And so I also saw him as a speech language pathologist for a while, and then as an energy support after that. And so he basically would come and he'd say, this is what I need. I need this, this, and this in order to integrate fully into my body. And a lot of that was an energetic modality. And so, and every time I would get nervous or excited or worried about him just showing up that way and working with him that way, he would just calm me down. He very often would take his little hand and stick it right into my heart. And when my heart would relax again, he would go on and tell me what he needed next. But when he came, his request was he wanted to fully integrate. He wanted to fully be in the body. And the reason he wanted to fully integrate was because his mother was a single mom, and he really felt that he needed her, right? He needed her to be here. And so that was a soul agreement they had made. But so when he came, he said, I want to fully be here. And so we went through this process together, and it took 3 months to the day that we started that work. He completely lost his autism diagnosis. He completely went into a regular classroom, and even to this day, functions as probably his mom's best friend. It's like they're very much connected in that way. But so there's all kinds of different ways that integration can take place. Sometimes the integration is for the parent. Sometimes the integration is for the child. But every integration happens at the dictate of the soul, not just because somebody says, I'd like my kid to be, quote unquote, more typical or normal. I highly discourage that because we want them to fully integrate based on their own soul's trajectory, not on what somebody else needs or wants for them. So integration takes a lot of different forms, and more often than not, if I'm working with somebody who has a child diagnosed with autism, more often than not, most of the integration work starts with the parent, releasing grief, releasing guilt, releasing shame, releasing blame, all kinds of energies can move out And as it moves out, then we get different reflections. So, yeah. So we usually start there with integration.
Oh, so interesting. I loved reading, excuse me, I loved reading that you said that these interactions, the entrainment,
Mm-hmm.
between mother and child or parent and child, where the child represents, the physical child that meets our inner child.
Yes, totally.
So, what a beautiful way to have our mirror shown through all of the generations, through all of the time, through all of the layers. So, when you work with the parents or work with the children, can you share a little bit about the process that you use?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first it's really important to understand that every lineage is attempting to shift patterns, right?
Right.
And so we can look at ourselves as individuals, right? But we know that we're not separate islands unto ourselves. We know that we are part of a collective whole. And at the very least, we're part of a lineage, right? And so a lot of the patterns, obviously, well, let me say that any pattern that doesn't get doesn't get integrated within a lifetime, that pattern will then pass on to the child at the time of conception in order for them to have a go at it, to have a run at it. So, what's beautiful is that by the time a parent gets to me, usually they are very interested in their own spiritual development. They're interested in seeing things through a different lens than they have. So, very often we start any given session with what are the experiences that you're having with your child, okay? And let's first identify those experiences. Let's talk about how they make you feel, what comes up because you have these experiences, and very often, say for instance, a parent might say, "Well, that this child is controlling everything in our lives right now," or this child is, we can't get any sleep, we can't get any rest, we can't get any, right, because these are the things that are going on. And so very often what I'll do is I'll just shift it around and I'll just ask, is there a part of you that never gets to rest? Is there a part of you that never gets to just relax, right? And sometimes just asking the questions, the tears already come. Sometimes because that part of us that has projected that energy out and thus are receiving that reflection, that part of us has never been talked to. It's never been seen. It's never been validated. So when we start asking questions, like that of the parent, all of a sudden they start, oh, they already get it. They already see, oh my gosh, okay, he's showing me this simply because he's trying to get to a deeper part within me, right? So a lot of times the sessions are first geared around how does that parent perceive the child and what are the challenges that are they're meeting in their relationship, and then kind of dismissing the messenger. Let's dismiss the child for a second and let's have this not be about him or her for just a moment. Let's turn this back around and let's really give some love and some attention to whatever gets triggered within us when those kinds of experiences happen. And a lot of times, too, another technique I really like to use, and I use this in my own life all the time, is the minute that that trigger comes up, I usually ask that trigger, I'll say, how old are you? how old are you? I'm like, all of a sudden, maybe anger or rage or frustration or sadness or even sometimes elation and bliss, kick up. I think the moment that we realize that, a lot of times we say, I'm angry or I'm frustrated, right? But the truth is the totality of us, that's not what's angry or frustrated. It's only an aspect of us that's angry or frustrated. So if we can single it out in some ways, if we can isolate it so that we can actually communicate with it. So for instance, I recently was getting ready to go for a doctor's appointment, right? And I've been to how many millions of doctor's appointments. As I went to that doctor's appointment, for whatever reason, I went into absolute fear. I went into absolute stress. My body could feel it. So I said to that stress, how old are you? And the minute I said, how old are you? She said 3. And I said, okay, well, I just went back to my 3-year-old, my physical 3-year-old. When I was 3 years old, I was in the hospital for 10 days. So it makes perfect sense, right? So the moment I just spoke to her and started interacting with her, then I could, all of a sudden, it's like all the experiences in my body started to calm down. All I had to do is say to her, how are you feeling? What's going on? It's almost like putting that 3-year-old right out in front of you and talking to her just as any person would a 3-year-old. We know how to talk to the 3-year-olds outside of us. We don't know how to talk to the triggered 3-year-old inside of us, right? Yeah. And so once, a lot of times I'm taking parents through that kind of experience, and it's a very powerful unfolding, because once people understand that they can negotiate these things that are coming up in such a way that it has an impact not only on their lives but on their children's lives, they're really motivated to go down that road. They're really motivated to use some of the approaches that are offered. But those are a few of them.
Those are wonderful. It's do you find that it is necessary for people to know how old the the voice
that aspect is? Yeah. The only reason that I find that that's helpful, they don't always have to know, but like, for instance, if I have a very young one inside of me that's hurting and is using some kind of strategy just to get through life, like I say, very often we miss this within ourselves. But most of us, like if I said to you, it's like, let's just put, your 3-year-old's coming up, or there's something coming up. If I just asked you what age it was, exactly. Like if I said it was a 15-year-old, you're going to speak differently to a 15-year-old than you are to a 3-year-old, just naturally. Right? So the benefit of knowing the age is knowing how to talk to what it is we're interacting with inside of ourselves.
That's so important. Making sure that we're, meeting yourself where you are in some way.
Exactly. Yeah, really important.
I'm wondering, because so many people in life, especially as children, weren't really taught. We're not really taught a lot about how to even label a feeling.
Right.
What is it that I'm feeling? Because we get so flooded with the pain or the emotion, and some people, many people, I think, were even punished or spoken to harshly. And so I'm just wondering, like, as we continue to grow generation after generation, do you think we're becoming more literate in our feelings?
I would hope so. And I do think so. I think that especially now, I mean, you look at what's happening just in the world right now.
Mm-hmm.
And if you step back from everything that's happening, what you see is people having a lot of emotion, right? A lot of this pent up energy and emotion is now coming to the surface. So in many ways, just by virtue of the fact that we're moving from one generation to another, we are feeling different things than we have felt in past generations.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that there's a lot more conversation about things like mental health, and there's a lot more conversation about feelings and emotion in all kinds of ways. So I think that just by default, we are becoming more literate as we move. Also, you think about things like, you know, in maybe my generation or the generation before mine, you know, men were allowed certain feelings and women were allowed certain feelings, you know, and men were allowed certain realities, women were allowed certain realities. That's all starting to fall apart now. So I think by default, we are moving in that direction. And I think that the real opportunity is to not do these things by default. I think the real opportunity is to use our daily lives, and especially our lives with our children, to actually get to and integrate some of these deeper places within ourselves instead of having it just come up haphazardly, right? And so there are very specific things that we can do every single time we're triggered, you know, whether it's by our child or whether it's by what's going on out in the world right now. But we have a huge opportunity to kind of peel apart the places and spaces, the strategies within us that keep us from realizing who we actually are, you know, the greater totality of our being. And I think a lot of those strategies have to do with, one, being willing to feel, right?
Yeah.
Two, not necessarily projecting or blaming or shaming whoever is bringing up the feeling, because that's their job. They don't even know it's their job, but it's just their job to bring up the feeling. So once that feeling's been brought up, I always tell parents, do whatever you need to do to make the situation comfortable. And a lot of times with autism, you have to create safety, right? But once you've done that, step back. Just give yourself the opportunity to step back for a moment and really close your eyes, notice what you're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Where are you feeling it? How are you feeling it? Sometimes just being with it shifts it all by itself.
Mm-hmm.
Because more often than not, we're into the outer landscape, we're into the outer world and trying to get that child to behave differently so that we feel better, right? And this opportunity is really, okay, he or she brought up the information, but as we turn that inward and are simply present with it, not to beat up on ourselves, not to make ourselves wrong, but just, I'm just going to be with how this feels. Sometimes that will shift it altogether, right? And if it doesn't, then we can use some of these other strategies, you know, like how old is it, or how does it make me feel? We can use some other languaging to get to it. But the biggest piece is just being willing to feel, right?
Yeah.
And you're right, as children, we weren't taught that. And we can feel by default, like I was saying, or we can feel on purpose, which is so empowering. Because when you feel on purpose and you see what changes in your life because you were willing to feel on purpose, then all of a sudden there's this realization, oh my gosh, I actually am in control of my own reality. I actually am in control of what I put out in the world. Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds like, even allowing yourself enough space to respond.
Totally.
Oh, not be reactive, but responding, which allows us to take some ownership
Yeah.
over some pieces.
And a lot of people, Amelia, will say, when I when I share that with them, it's like, let's just respond versus react, right? But the fact is that we all know that if somebody triggers us, we're already in reaction, right? We're already in fight, flight, or freeze. So a lot of times I will just say to parents, maybe the trick is to not react to our reactions, right? So we're going to react. That's part of the triggering mechanism. It's designed to have us react, right? So once we react, though, we can give ourselves permission to, instead of go into blame or shame, go into feel, right?
Right.
And if we're going into that space within us, just, okay, even, oh my gosh, I reacted. I'm in blame, I'm in shame, right? It's like, okay, instead of making ourselves wrong for being in blame or shame, let's just feel that for a second. How does it feel to be in blame or shame? And most parents will say to me, most clients will say to me, oh my God, they'll have a memory of something instantaneously. Oh, I remember that. I remember that feeling. And again, the moment they put it together, that it never was them in the beginning, it didn't start with them. It started with an experience, right? It didn't start with the totality of who they are.
Right.
It started with an experience that overlaid on top of that totality. And once we get that, people get pretty excited about doing this on a regular basis. Yeah.
Yeah. Gives us some, puts us back in the driver's seat.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Be responsible for ourselves. So I'm just curious also, if you were to envision a world where everyone was using these strategies, you know, what do you think it would look like out there?
Beautiful. I mean, honestly, just beauty. And I think mainly because there's such beauty in our capacity to be responsible for our own lives. I think it would be empowering. I think it would be beautiful. I think it would be much easier on future generations, as we really embrace that that truly our outer landscape is an opportunity for us to heal the inner landscape, right? For us to integrate that inner landscape. And so this opportunity is available to us 24/7. I tell people all the time, we could just do this as our spiritual practice and we would evolve exponentially. We would become more and more aware of ourselves exponentially. So I see it as a world that is much easier on future generations. I see it as a world that's much more compassionate and loving, as we're giving permission to ourselves to feel what we feel instead of trying to negate and negotiate what we feel. So yeah, I would be very excited to live in that world.
Would too, Suzy. And I'm also really struck by, the space between these interactions. That it's not just you doing your own personal work, but that it cascades to your children.
Absolutely.
And so just sort of dreaming into that rich potential of a world where we've done our work so that our children can continue to do different work and heal 7 generations ahead and 7 generations behind. And
It's so true. And we know what we've created by being separated from ourselves. We know what we've created in the world by being separated from various aspects of ourselves, because we see it out there every day, right? And I mean, and what does it look like when all of those aspects of ourselves are working in the same direction? working out of love, working out of peace, working out of harmony, right? Then that's what we create in the outer landscape. So,
Well, I know, just looking out at the world right now, we're really, especially in our country, in such a very important place where it looks like generations of unintegrated parts have
yes,
come at the same time, talking about that inner landscape and outer landscape.
absolutely.
So, such a rich seedbed for freedom and beauty.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, Suzy, we're going to need to close soon, but I'm wondering, um, do you have any information or resources you would want to share with our group?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of information, blogs and videos and things like that on my website, which is SuzyMiller.com. And also, one of the things that it's not a book that I wrote or anything like that, but one that I'm really enamored with is The Presence Process by Michael Brown. I tell most of the people that come to me at some stage to take a look at that book. It's amazing in helping people unwind as well. And so then that way, by the time we are actually interacting, we have a similar language and can move really pretty quickly in moving some of these things through. So yeah, the website, the blogs, and definitely Michael Brown. Yeah.
Thank you, Suzy. This has been so wonderful to have you share a little bit. I think your perspective of following the feelings and, giving yourself an opportunity to have the space to do the inner work. Really grateful for our time together and really grateful for your 4 children
Yes.
so taught you, Riley and all the other wonderful children that keep you bringing this beautiful work out into the world.
Thank you. Thank you, Amelia.
Grateful.